Welcome to Housing Matters. Housing Matters is your go-to podcast for all things real estate. We cover a wide range of topics to help you navigate the housing market with confidence, whether buying your first home, looking to invest, or exploring development opportunities. We're really excited to have joining us here today for our 9th episode, Ed Gardner, who is the broker-owner of Gardner Real Estate Group, one of Portland's most respected real estate companies. With over 35 years of experience in the industry, he has a proven track record of connecting buyers with the perfect properties and sellers with the right opportunities. Known for his professional approach and dedicated work ethic, Ed has skillfully navigated hundreds of transactions, from single-family homes to large development projects. He's also a passionate advocate for his community and has served as president of both the Greater Portland Board of Realtors and the Maine Association of Realtors, earning recognition as the Maine Realtor of the Year in 2014. Beyond real estate, Ed is a founding member of the Equality Community Center and has held leadership roles with Friends of the Eastern Prom, Greater Portland Landmarks, and Norway Savings Bank. His commitment to service and deep understanding of Greater Portland housing market make him a trusted leader in the real estate world. Ed, I am so thankful to have you joining us here today. And I want to start with a little story of how I first met you. I was running for office the first time, and our friend Linda Gifford got together a group of realtors to come support this 25-year-old kid who was a real estate agent running for the legislature, and you were there. I mean, that was ground zero for me. I'll never forget that. 12 years of legislative service later and kind of in the retirement category. You've always been a great supporter, and I think it's because I don't even know what party affiliation you are. It doesn't matter, but we've come together around real estate issues. So thankful to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with you and celebrate years later real estate.
Yeah, there's a lot of changing, that's been going on in the real estate front, but you've been doing this, almost as long as I've been alive. So you have way more experience than I do. But can you share a bit about your background, where you're from and kind of how your early experiences shaped this path into real estate?
Sure. My story began in Lewiston, where I grew up. So my mom and dad were entrepreneurs. My dad owned a excavating construction company, and my mom went to school to become a cosmetologist. So they each owned their own businesses. My dad bought this old farmhouse back when we were 9, 10, 11 years old. It was almost uninhabitable, but he bought it for the land and for the gravel pit that he could develop now into his trucking business. So it was up to us 3 kids and my mom to help renovate the house, put floors down and paint walls and take out these rugs that had worms in it. It was so disgusting.
Wow.
But I was intrigued by it, and I didn't know how later that would turn into a business for me. So later on in life, I'll say when I was 16, and you go to school and you try to figure out, all right, which college are you going to go to? What profession are you going to integrate in as you leave high school? I was totally confused, and I didn't know what to do. It was also a time I came out as being gay. Mm-hmm. So I had to speak with myself and say, I don't think I want to go to college. I know I'm going to disappoint my parents here. But I also don't think I want to be in Lewiston. There was something about that vibe in me that didn't work. Mm-hmm. So I quit high school in my junior year, and I moved to Boston.
For real?
For real.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, my parents were upset. They were not happy with me. And, that I thought I was all grown up, and I was going to live with other gay people in Boston, and that would be my life. Well, about 3 months after that, I was homesick, and I wanted to come home. So I called my parents to tell them this, and they said, well, no, you're all grown up. Figure it out. It was a good life lesson, one that I appreciate them standing by. So I did come back. I got a job at Sears Roebuck, and I got a really crappy apartment after living in my van for a couple of weeks. But during the my break, I opened up the newspaper, and I saw this 12-unit apartment building for sale, bond for a deed. It was one of our 1980s local developers in Portland who couldn't have it in his portfolio anymore because it was such a rundown dump. It was really, really bad. But all I had to do is sign 2 documents to pay the 2 mortgage holders, which are 2 older guys, and they said, Sonny, you make that mortgage payment and you can own that building. So it not only gave me a place to live, but it gave me some income and it gave me some foresight into real estate.
How old were you at the time?
I was 17 when I bought that building.
A 12-unit building at 17?
You could buy it back then, bond for a deed. So I thought that was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But day 3 of getting in there, water heaters broke and, the tenants weren't paying rent and so on and so forth. But I lived in the building, and a couple of tenants that were very nice people, I've been there a long time, said, Ed, I'm going to teach you how to cut glass and sand floors and do electrical and plumbing so that you can get these apartments filled and back online, which I did until 4 months after being there, the city knocked on my door and said, you have 163 code violations on this building.
Wow.
You know about it, right? And I said, no, I just bought this building a while back. I didn't know anything about it. And they said, well, you have 30 days to fix these or the city is going to take this building.
Wow.
So I had to learn how to do more work to bring it up to code, which I did. I don't know how it happened, but I did.
Did they work with you, the city, to give you more than the 30 days, or you?
In some things they did. These were old tenement buildings on River Street in Lewiston, built for mill workers. So each room had 1 outlet. Well, the code had changed, and there had to be 3 outlets per room.
Yeah.
So, things like that. I couldn't hire an electrician. I didn't have the money for a permit. But all they wanted to do was test electrical. So I pulled off baseboards, rewired to the best I could, made appliances work where they didn't, and fixed glass that were broken windows. And they allowed it to take place.
Do you think, because this kind of goes into like this whole discussion that we've had for a long time in this podcast and beyond about like the barriers to entry for people, it seems to me, and you mentioned this, I could do that then. I mean, do you see a world that exists even now for an enterprising individual to do something like that?
Yeah. We work with buyers all the time, first-time home buyers that come in and expect to see a Taj Mahal in their first home, but what they're seeing is a place that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
So though I'm not going to tell them what to do, I'll give them a little bit of insight from my story to say, if you don't look at the wallpaper, that paint or those scratched up floors or something, as long as the house is safe and it's structurally sound, the rest of it's cosmetics.
Yeah.
And this is how you're going to build your life wealth from owning real estate. And the best way to do it is if you can buy a property that needs some help, put your own mark in it, maybe not buy somebody else's improvements. But then you'll see that in 3 to 4 to 5 years, you're going to build that equity, and now you're on your way to financial freedom, hopefully.
Yeah. So how long did you end up owning that building for? I'm just curious.
So I owned it for 3 years. I decided that, maybe it was 4 years, I was going to sell it. A real estate agent came to me and said, you've turned that building around. It's worth some money now. Would you like to sell it? And I said, sure. So I was supposed to realize a $30,000 profit. And I said, I'll go for it because now I can buy my next property. But the deal was I had to owner finance $10,000 of it, which I did. And I think I got one payment from that owner financing, and they went bankrupt. But with the $20,000, I was able to buy another building and a convenience store.
Oh, wow.
So the next building, of course, was another building I lived in. It was in fine shape in Auburn, and then bought a convenience store. And I did that while I was buying and selling other properties.
So you really started your journey into real estate more on the kind of what I would call which we've talked about before, this BRRRR method, where you buy, renovate, rent and refinance, if you will, or you were doing some flipping, it sounds like, of properties. When did you end up getting your real estate license and kind of getting more into brokerage?
Well, it was, it In 1995, when I moved to Portland from Lewiston, I had a sailboat, and I had it down at DeMillo's, and I'd look up at the city every Friday night when I came to say, this is such a beautiful city. There's, so different than Lewiston. I think I want to live here. So I contacted somebody that had a property for sale. It was the Portland Stage Company building.
Oh, really?
And said, I think I want to buy this building from you. And he says, well, how are you going to buy it? And I says, well, I have a convenience store. And he looked at it as a cash cow, and the Portland Stage Company building needed a lot of work. He said, why don't we do a trade? And I said, you've got my attention. Let's do it. So I bought the Portland Stage Company building and renovated that, and then got into my Portland real estate market that way, bought and resold places. I think it was probably the third or fourth home that I bought and renovated in Portland using a broker who I liked. They weren't doing the best job for me. I thought I could do better. So after them basically not showing up for a few meetings, I went and got my real estate license to sell that building. It was a 7-unit brick building on Spring Street in
Do you ever wish you had kept
Portland.
it?
Oh, totally. No, yeah.
That's
Yes.
probably back when units were trading for like 30,000 a unit or something in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting story, but you've kind of really kept your finger on the pulse of and have done a number of significant development projects yourself. Can you tell us about, your journey in the development field and how, because you've kind of done something that I think is somewhat unique in that you've continued brokerage all these years and have done that very successfully, but at the same time, you're also doing development projects. Can you speak to that? You did, I think, was it, if I get my information correct, my homework correct, a 10-story office building on Congress Street, parking garage, affordable housing for ECC, 160-unit condo, and rehabbed like 130,000 square foot building?
Yeah.
When do you sleep?
Well, that was my part-time work. Well, shortly after I got my real estate license, I met a wonderful man named Bill, and he had bought a bunch of apartment buildings in Portland. And he said, I'm thinking about taking all these apartment buildings. There were 80 units combined total, and I want to condominiumize and sell them off as condo units. Would you be interested in brokering this for me? So I toured some of the buildings, beautiful buildings in the west end of Portland, and I said, of course. So that's what got my start in brokerage. I had 80 listings immediately.
Wow.
And then I started doing my own, buying buildings that needed help, larger, 8 units or 12 units, and started renovating those into condominium units. It's great and lucrative until I realized that, wait a minute, we're doing good by rehabbing these buildings, but we're also taking rental markets off the market. So somebody that had an $800 apartment per month now is a $150,000 unit for somebody to buy. Didn't feel that good.
Interesting.
But
I kind of feel that feeling sometimes too.
yeah, you want to be able to help these buildings that needed the help, but at the same time, you've got to look at the city as a whole.
Yeah.
And you need diversity for a successful city to work.
Yeah.
So I was hired by other developers to build to sell new housing. So we would help design and sell these particular buildings in and around Portland. But right now we're working on a 160-unit condo building off Stevens Ave in Portland. We're now marketing, just finished designing building 3.
Wow.
So we've got 50 sold. This will be another 28 units, and we'll continue down the road until we get a full house there.
That's exciting. What you just mentioned, it's interesting because there's a lot of proposals that come across my desk, and recently had somebody asking my thoughts around kind of this acquisition of a building, ironically in Lewiston, where it has not historically been managed well. And the whole play was to go in, essentially put lipstick on it, and then jack up rents. And I said to the person, I'm like, look, your numbers look okay. There's a place for this in some cases. But at the end of the day, those folks that are living in those units might be okay with not a fresh paint job or new flooring as long as they can afford to pay their rent. Yeah. And the building is safe. You certainly don't want any code violations or anything where water's coming in or it's falling down and unsafe. But maybe they don't want this forced gentrification of their building. Why not instead use your resources to go build more units in Lewiston? I mean, Maine as a whole needs 84,000 new units. And I think there's a certain amount of rehab that needs to be done because places have code violations, like you talked about from way back when you were 17. There were code violations then, and they still exist now. Anything that can be done to make buildings safer and more habitable. But just going in and doing very little and then making your economic case based on jacking up rents, to me, just doesn't feel right. And the only way to really combat that is with new inventory, which you've been a big part of. What do you think are some of the barriers to housing creation? I mean, regulations, you've done a lot of work in Portland, and it seems like there's a lot of more regulation in Portland, but are you seeing any barriers to housing creation?
Well, if you look at the market and pricing as it's unfolded here in the past couple of decades in downtown Portland, I'd say the first barrier in any development, if you want to do it in the right area to be able to command the highest rents, maybe if it's a condominium building, you want to get the best prices for resale, then you've got to buy the property. And property is expensive right now. So if you can find the property, then good. Then if it's going to be a larger project, you need to find a developer. So you want one that's keen on rules and laws. And if it's for affordable housing, then you want to get somebody that's experienced, that knows what they're doing here. The building that we're doing right now for the Equality Community Center is a parking lot that I donated right next to the building we just bought a few years ago, an old bank right on Casco Street, downtown Portland. Without that land, the project probably would not have happened. But this, at the end of the day, will be just over $22 million. Wow. And it's going to be 54 units. So, yes, there's barriers for code. Historic preservation, comes into play when you're in these districts. But you knock down those things one at a time. You've got to be patient, but you've got to be persistent. You've got to know your issues ahead of time and address them as you go. So,
what about rent restrictions? I know that there's discussions about trying to have rent restrictions statewide, and a lot of that conversation has found its nexus in Portland doing that. Previous guest on here, Paul Peck, who I know is a mutual friend of ours, has said that seems to be a little bit of softening in demand among rentals in Portland, which blows my mind given the fact that there's such a need for additional housing, at least based on all the reports we have. So it has me going down this kind of rabbit hole of if it's rent restriction or if it's something else, or if it's just the sheer cost to build, demanding a certain level of rent that now we're at a kind of a breaking point.
Yeah, it's so when rent control came to be in Portland in 2020, I believe, being one that promotes home ownership and the freedom to be able to do what you want to with a property wasn't very popular amongst the real estate community, and we did fight it very hard. Now looking several years later, some of those same people that are servicing restaurants and help in the workforce community, without that restriction, we may not have those people in the city.
That's an interesting point, because there isn't robust public transportation either. I mean, we have some, but not enough to get more into the outskirts.
That's right. This recode in Portland, so this is a new effort to change all of the current zoning that we have I think the book is that thick, is to bring it down to something more kind of spread over the whole city. More, I don't want to say generic, but that it gives these multi areas like Outer Washington and Outer Brighton and Outer Forest a better transportation mode there, so people can live off peninsula now, get into the city easier, and then create more density in those areas that we weren't able to before.
Yeah, it is interesting because when you hop on a plane and leave Portland, it's like, wow, there's a lot of green space. And in large part by design in Maine, because we're a very eco-friendly state, but you look and you're like, that's not really super far away when you start going over other larger metro areas, even as close as Manchester, New Hampshire, for instance, where they have, a lot more development. And so it leads me thinking like, okay, Maine is a beautiful state, wonderful place to live. But at some point, some of our zoning, which is well-intentioned to protect the environment, is at odds with really creating the more dense housing that we need. And we oftentimes are building housing around car parking spaces instead of human beings.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you see Portland changing some of its restrictions around parking or anything that makes it a little bit easier to develop?
Yeah, I think the recode is going to be a good thing. Chatting with people around the city about it. Some people love it. Some people not sure about it. Other people are opposed to it. But I think it is the right thing at the right time. Looking at density, parking. There's a lot of development happening in Portland where developers are saying, leave the cars on the outskirts, bust them into the city so that we can do more here. People don't need cars in the city.
Right.
And, as a real estate agent, yes, I need one, but otherwise, that might be a good point there.
Yeah, for sure. So, Ed, your bio really highlights a lot of community engagement. And I wanted to kind of unpack that a little bit about your work in the community, why the organizations that you're a part of, and what kind of work have they been doing in the greater Portland area?
Portland was really good to me in that they supported my work as far as some development, hired me as a real estate agent, and I got to be successful because of it, because of coming to this community. I remember buying a piece of property on the Eastern Prom, a beautiful 4-unit that overlooked the ocean, and somebody came up to me to say, we're going to renovate that park right across the street. It's called Fort Allen Park. And would you consider coming on to the board and helping? And I said, I've never been on a board before. I don't know, maybe. So I did, and simultaneously got on the board of Greater Portland Board of Realtors. That little board to create the restoration of Fort Allen Park was pretty cool. It taught me philanthropy, so I could go to my neighbors or go to other people with money to say, can you give us $15,000, $20,000, $50,000? That's not an easy thing to do. But I really liked it because it just created more community as people wanted to give back to their world. Greater Portland Board of Realtors and Maine Association of Realtors, that was an excellent kind of learning, my college, if you will, about board leadership. And then after that, learning about historic preservation in Portland. Funny little story, when I bought the Portland Stage Company building, it was pretty ratty on the outside, and I wanted to renovate it with new paint and new signage for all of the buildings. So I went out and just picked out my own signs with these wrought iron hangers and so on, and I got a call from the city saying, you didn't get a permit for that, and it's not really what we had in mind for signage. So I went back and forth with them a little bit and said, well, this is what I'm going to do. But then realized, after thinking about it, that when I go to bigger cities, my mind appreciates historic buildings, especially ones that have been taken care of. So looking around the greater Portland area, including all of Maine, including Augusta, where we are today, historic preservation is really needed. So I got on that board and got into leadership and really really enjoy seeing the work that organization does. And then from there, my earlier story about coming out as I was gay when I was 16, 17, moved to Boston, I really didn't have any place to go, to learn about my complicated self coming out. So I got together with 3 other members, and we co-founded the Equality Community Center to be able to have a place for LGBTQ plus people to come to learn about themselves, to be comfortable in their own skin, and thrive in their community. So that was something really close to my heart that I wanted to, pull together other people to be on the board, other, committee members to be able to come forward and say, yeah, this community's been good to us. Let's give back in the same way that we can to make it a better place.
I love that. I think oftentimes we are so fortunate to live in this country where, we, for a large part, especially in Maine, don't have to worry about safety every single day and different issues. We meaning the majority of people, but there's still so many people among us that are struggling with different things. And until when folks who have maybe a certain level of security or something going on in their life where they have the ability to give back, a lot of times people don't give back. They just find another hobby or do something else. I guess maybe it's the way we're wired, like our hobbies are to get involved in different organizations and do things. But I hear in your response like this, desire to kind of give back to the community. And we encourage a lot of that here. I mean, our tagline is selling homes, building community. And I'm a firm believer that unless we do give back in some capacity, whether that's coaching a Little League team or being involved on the board for the food bank or getting involved with creating a whole center for people to go to, I mean, we can get involved at so many different levels. But it's critical that we do that because otherwise the community that we all share as a whole suffers without that kind of engagement.
I totally agree. And especially being a real estate agent, you're welcoming people into your community, sometimes that are far away. And if it kind of feels good to be able to say, well, would you like to be part of this organization? You'll get to meet people.
Yeah.
I volunteer there, and I think you'll like it.
Yeah,
type of a thing.
That's great. Yeah, I really, I agree with you too about the historic piece. I mean, the building that we're in now was renovated with historic tax credits and brought back to kind of its original grandeur, circa 1928. That wouldn't have been possible without that program. And at the state, they're actually looking at extending that indefinitely and doing away with the sunset, which is coming up in around 2030, because we have so many old buildings, and we could probably do a whole podcast on historic preservation alone. But it's really just fascinating to hear your story because it's so many different chapters to it, but they really, it seems like you found a home in Portland and you've done a lot of great work there, but that's trickled out throughout our state with the work that you've done with the Association of Realtors, both in the state and nationally, and really thankful to have you being a part of this community.
It's been fun. We're not done yet.
No,
so
no, this is just
going.
Part of the chapter.
That's right.
So a lot has changed in the real estate market since you became a realtor, especially these last 12 months. I'm just curious. I'd love to have a conversation about like what you think about the changes in our industry and where you think things might be going in the next 5 to 10 years. I know it's not always easy to be a prognosticator, but kind of where you can see the future of real estate going as well. We'll start with the changes in the industry. What are your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, do you remember the real estate book? So you have a little real estate book to show your buyers where they can find a property, and it had a little, postcard in it with a couple of little lines on it. Now that technology has taken over, so we have hundreds of websites around the country promoting properties now. In fact, so much that buyers can probably come to their agents and say, I know more about that house than you do.
Yeah.
We've been studying it on Zillow or Redfin or whatever site that they're on. So technology has really changed the way the buyers are viewing properties. They can go online too to get a mortgage pre-approval as well. But I think, and I think technology wants to replace the human in the deal, but we are psychologists in the real estate transaction. And I think without the human interaction between buyer and seller, I don't think it'll be as successful as it is now.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I just spoke with a woman last week who's considering selling her home. She's not sure what she wants to do. She's recently widowed about 4 years ago. And she's like, she said a few times on the call, I'm not 100% sure what I want to do, but I just need to have a conversation about real estate so that I can learn more about what my options are. And I'm like, no problem. I'm happy to do that. I do these conversations with folks all the time. People often will probably tell you the same thing. You're more of a therapist than a salesperson, which I'd rather be more of a therapist than a salesperson. Yeah. But it's hard for me to imagine like AI or a computer having that kind of conversation with somebody in a situation like that. And I think that's what you just touched on, the human element.
Yeah, AI was writing our ads for us a year ago, I think, when they came out, and we stopped it.
Yeah.
Because it's just so flowery and it colors the property in a way that is not real.
Yeah.
So AI, I think, is good for some things, but you need to leave the human element in the real estate transaction.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like you believe that traditional real estate model of, well, you've seen an evolution in this, because when you started, there wasn't as much buyer representation, right?
No.
But it was kind of a Wild West.
Yeah.
And then that evolved into more representation for buyers and sellers. And do you think that in time that buyer representation is going to go back to the way it was in the 80s, or is there a new norm that's been established?
I hope that we do keep buyer agency here. There's so much that can go wrong with a transaction. I've got a new set of buyers that are brand new to the real estate market that looked at a home and they loved it and want to put an offer in, but I've tried to explain the downfalls of it, that when in 3 and 5 years you want to be able to sell this home, you need to pay attention to the negatives that the next buyer is going to see. Maybe it's that new cell phone tower that was just permitted to be in your backyard, or the underpinning of the house is all rotted, or they're building a Walmart across the street. Some of these things a buyer's not going to know if they're not represented and somebody's not doing the work for them on their behalf.
So this is a little controversial, but you and I are both diehard members of the National Association of Realtors. However, they're under a lot of fire right now, from DOJ essentially saying that a number of policies such as clear cooperation and so forth are in violation of antitrust, and that stuff's kind of playing itself out in court. But I mean, do you see a world in which, real estate agents 10, 15 years from now just say, hey, we don't need the trade association? Or maybe a better question is, what can the trade association be doing to ensure that, they're strong in years to come? And with technology and access to all this information and the ability to directly text message or lobby congressional members right on their own Twitter page, I mean, do we still need a trade association?
Well, the trade association was born 100 years ago, and there was good reason for it. And to fast forward now, yeah, that is a cloud over the association. And there have been a few real estate agents that said, I'm going to be a realtor and not be in my association anymore. And I reminded them, you can't call yourself a realtor.
Right, that's a copyrighted designation.
It is. I was lucky enough to attend the latest NAR convention in Boston this past year. And there was a lot of talk about it, pros and cons of, should the association exist, or should it go away, or should there be modifications to it? Processing all of this, and as you said, yes, I was pretty heavy into realtors for a lot of years here, promoting its wealth and wealth of knowledge and skill and everything else it gives to you, along with the code of ethics. It is a bump in the road, I think, for the association. There will be members that want to leave the association They're going to leave behind some of the great tools that NAR has given to them to do real estate in a good way. But I think they'd come back again. I'd hate to think that NAR is just there to monitor commission or talk about commission. There's so many other things that the association does for the real estate industry.
I think you touched on one briefly, but I think it's worth unpacking, particularly for consumers that are listening to this show. It's the Code of Ethics. As a trade organization, the National Association of Realtors has a Code of Ethics, which we must abide by in order to call ourselves realtors, which is a standalone designation. It's not realtor or realtor. It's 2 syllables, realtor. And it is a designation given to members of the association. One can be a licensed real estate agent and not be a realtor. I remember when I first got my real estate license, I was working at Valley Real Estate at the time in Hollowell, and Chris was like, "You will become a member of the Association of Realtors." And I was like, okay, sure, no problem. I didn't really getting into it. I was like, whatever I got to do, check the box. But in time, I've become really thankful that we have this trade organization, not only because I know that the Code of Ethics and that training is being given to all people who are Realtor members, but also the work behind the scenes that I see the association doing on behalf of homeowners in Maine and the industry as a whole at the State House when it comes to lobbying efforts. And a lot of times, real estate agents, we don't like to talk about politics and whatnot, but it does impact our lives and it does impact our industry. And housing is such an enormous part of GDP in Maine, the gross domestic product, and such an integral part to the growth of our economy that, if left unchecked, things could go sideways. And there's a lot of times where, but for the involvement of the association at the State House, I think things would have been a lot worse. And I think a lot of members maybe just kind of take that for granted because they're not seeing it. And that's okay. That's what maybe people are like, hey, I paid my dues. Yeah. I gave my donation. Leave me alone. That's okay. But it really has made a tremendous difference in Maine. And I know we do business here a lot differently than other states. I mean, you have had a lot of colleagues from around the nation being involved in the association at that level who see things that are maybe a bit crooked in their states or things that are done weird. They have multiple MLSs. We only have one, So a lot of these changes in the last year, we were kind of already doing in Maine, disclosing that you don't have to pay a buyer fee. I mean, that's been in our contracts since I started real estate. But I think some people nationally were like, wow, this is a new thing, So I'm encouraged to hear you talk about that in that vein, which is that in order to maintain the professionalism of our industry, I think it is critically important that we have a trade association and that as many real estate agents become realtors as possible so that we're all working kind of from the same playbook, if you will.
Yeah, there's some states that don't have, so being a member of Maine Association of Realtors, as you know, we have access to zip forms, which gives us hundreds of different documents to use, from purchase and sale agreements to lead paint addendums and so on, so that we can do good professional business. But there's some places that don't have this type of continuity within their state. I had a couple of real estate agents from Florida stay with me for 2 weeks this past summer, just after the lawsuit. And one of them manages a bunch of brokers and was getting call after call after call to say, what is this buyer agency? They don't have buyer agency in Florida.
Oh, really?
And they have several MLSs that are contradicting what they're supposed to do, open houses and so on. It's going to be a new learning process, I think, for a lot of the country to be able to pick up and understand. But we're very lucky in Maine. We have some good predecessors that give us one MLS, as you said. We have great leadership here. And I think the people that do business in Maine are they get it. They understand it, and I think they can give that understanding to their buyers and seller clients so that they understand it. The seller says, well, why should I pay a commission to a buyer's agent? When the buyer is bringing all the cash to the table and creating the sale that the seller wouldn't have to be able to make this all work. it's interesting conversations right now, and I think it'll go for the next year and a half or so. But I have a feeling that realtors and agents will figure it out.
Yeah, I'm confident as well. And I think, the added discussion is good. We're coming off a period of time of record price increases. Maine saw the highest per capita increase in home price in the United States since 2019, 78%. And, a lot of people are asking a lot of questions, like, why do I need to pay this person, or should I need this or not? And it's forcing a lot of practitioners, I think, in the industry to have conversations they probably should have been having anyway with people about justifying their value. You know what I mean? And, I think there's tremendous value. Obviously, we're preaching to the choir on this, to having real estate agent involved in a transaction, but it shouldn't just be because. People should never think for a moment you must have a real estate agent to buy a property. That's not true. I think it's a good idea.
Yep.
But, people out there might think that they can do it on their own and don't want one. That's more power to you if you feel that's the case. But there's a lot of reasons why having a good pro in your corner makes sense. And now we as practitioners, we really can have that conversation with people. And I'm seeing it happening more frequently probably than it did before about, hey, why is this a good idea? Here's what you're paying for. Here's, what to do. And I think, I hope that people will continue to have buyer's agents because they do help avoid a lot of landmines.
Well, the market, right after COVID, we had no idea that this market would just soar. So, properties going 100,000 over asking, no inspections, you can't finance it, you've got to pay cash. The agents weren't taking the time, I think, to work with those buyers to explain, and the sellers.
Right.
It was just, oh my God, I've got 30 offers to negotiate here.
Yeah.
We're forgetting what we're really supposed to be doing here for the industry.
I don't know about you, but I'm kind of thankful that things have slowed down a little bit.
Totally.
And I think there are some people that got in at a time where there was this fervor and frothiness in the market, and they're making different decisions about what they want to do, whether to stay or to go. But at the same time, there seems to be more of an equilibrium, and like you can breathe and you can do your property inspection and do your homework that you want to do and don't feel uber rushed. It's a big decision.
Yeah, we're seeing properties that are maybe not selling at asking price.
Yeah.
That's refreshing, for the market to be able to kind of level off a little bit to a more healthier, graduated increase.
I don't want to see it go back to the days of, you prayed it would sell before the listing agreement was up, but
No,
I think a little slowdown is always good.
I agree.
So it brings me to this next question, which is, what kind of tips do you have? We have some people who watch this podcast that are, maybe considering buying real estate for the first time, and other people that are more savvy, they're investors. Are there some general themes that people should really know when they're considering about buying real estate that's important?
Well, you can't just make real estate, right? You can't go to the store and say, I want to buy a piece of land so I can put it here. It is going to be probably their biggest investment that they're going to have in their life. If it isn't the right piece for them, then that's okay. But don't give up on that dream or the need to be able to own your own home, I think, or your own building. It was, I had a little office building downtown Portland, and I looked at this 10-story office building. It was really big, and it was a lot of money, and I had a little talk with myself and said, if you're gonna, increase your net worth, you've got to take a little bit of a risk and make it work if you think you can make it work. So this building, of course, wasn't fully tenanted. It needed work. But I made it happen. So just, follow that little gut voice inside of you. If it's saying, I'm a little scared is okay, but go for it. I don't think you're going to miss the opportunity of wealth by buying real estate right now in Maine. As we see our chief economist, Lawrence Yan, will do these little snippets for realtors talking about Maine, and that it looks to be the next San Francisco of the Northeast.
Interesting.
Because
hopefully, though, we don't end up with the homelessness issues, which we
you know.
need to address. I mean, maybe we can talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do we not go too expensive? But I do think we're on an upward trajectory as a state.
Oh, we are. You know, we don't have the, God forbid, floods and fires and earthquakes and other disasters that are wrecking our state. And we do have a really good quality of life here. You know, we've got the outdoors and fresh air and the ocean. We're very lucky to be here. And I think people are seeing that and coming into these major cities demanding better housing, you know, and nicer things than what they've come from. But to your point, it does create kind of an imbalance in our bigger cities where we do have a little bit more wealthy and creating a less of a middle class. And we do have to be careful of that.
Yeah, it's a difficult line to walk because you need housing, I think, at all levels. And a lot of times there are public resources for very affordable housing, but those resources are pretty limited. And then there's a market for luxury because it's at such a high per square foot price that it can justify, you know, the means to get there in terms of land acquisition and cost to build and all that. And yet there's the people in the middle, the firefighters and the nurses and, you know, and maybe the cooks at the restaurants that we like to go to, who are not a low enough income to qualify for any of the subsidized housing that's being created, but not high enough income to afford anything close to luxury, and they're just being left out. And you know, a lot of that has to do with financing projects and how they end up going together. And then, like you talked about, the cost of land, you know, per acre in Portland being way higher than, say, Gorham or Pownell or something, you know. But it's like, what do we do to inspire more people in the real estate community? Because there's a need for us to help with brokering deals, you know, to make sure, like we talked about earlier, people don't miss surprises and so forth. But is there more we can do as an industry to really promote and even get behind or do projects to add more inventory? Or should we just stay out of that?
I don't know. I think as a fairly successful real estate agent, I felt the strong need to give back. I mean, this is a community in Portland that welcomed me in where I didn't know anybody when I moved into that town. And I learned about nonprofits and giving back and so on and so forth. So I felt like, okay, you've done well, Ed. Now give it back to those people that helped you lift up. So I don't know if more real estate agents could get together and figure out a way to be able to negotiate a good deal with some of those people sitting on those valuable lots that could be affordable or workforce housing buildings. That would be a great thing. And developers, too. I happen to be very lucky to work with a developer who works with a lot of low-income housing projects, historic tax credit projects, building condominiums, but always feels the need to give back. And if more developers, I think, could follow that rule, I think we'd see a more balanced, housing thing in Maine.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that there's no silver bullets, only silver buckshot. And, we have obviously challenges on the trade front that makes it more difficult to construct. I mean, are your projects that you're working on right now, this one, 55 units, is it? 54 units? Yeah. How has it been getting folks to the job site? I mean, are things kind of, it's started, right?
We break ground in another 3 weeks.
Okay.
So
you'll see.
But it's a thing. We've had to cobble together. This is the Equality Community Center is a brand new organization, 10 years old now, where they bought their own building to bring in organizations that work with marginalized communities. It's a beautiful, but in need of a lot of work, bank building right next door. So they didn't have a lot of money to be able to, go out and put down $500,000 or $1 million to do it. But if you find the right developer who knows to get those funding sources from the right places, you can do it. And, minus the cost of the land, yes, I think we're going to be able to find the tradespeople to build this building. I think we're going to build it on time. And right now, I think we have close to 400 people on an interest list that want to rent these apartments.
Wow.
That won't be ready for another 14 months or so.
Wow, that's incredible. Who's the general contractor?
Penobscot Construction won this bid.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, they've been awesome to work with.
Yeah.
Along with Laura Redding from DC.
Oh, sure.
Construction, Kevin Bunker's team.
Yeah, Developers Collaborative.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. They do a lot of wonderful work in and throughout Maine, and I think, it's the more I get involved in the development side of things and see their name comes up a lot as a really good partner to have in efforts.
Well, that's what I hear too. You know, when I go around the barn to talk with these people that have submitted applications, with their developers, maybe they didn't get it because they didn't score high enough on the scorecard.
Right.
And Kevin's been an angel. To Maine, taking these buildings and turning them into housing.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. We just need more of it, I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Ed, and I appreciate your time here today. I wanted to ask you if there are any things that are going on or people want to follow more of the work you're doing. Where might they find more about Ed?
Well, I don't know. You can call me or you can find me downtown Portland. I'm pretty visible out there.
Yeah.
I'm not one to post a lot in social media.
Yeah.
But I am pretty well connected with nonprofit groups around Portland. And
if you want to get something done in Portland, call Ed.
We can get it done for you.
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, thanks for joining us today. And I think that this has been a great conversation about our industry, about some exciting projects going on down in your area of the state, and encouraging for fellow members of our association to learn more about how they can help with getting projects going forward and just continue to bolster this industry that's been really good to both of us, but is really a core part of Maine's economy.
Housing matters.
It does. Yeah. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for having me.